Deep in the void of space, where silence ruled and stars burned in distant isolation, a lone distress signal flickered to life. Weak, fragmented, almost lost in the cosmic background noise. Yet it carried a message of sheer desperation. The signal repeated on an emergency frequency, broadcasting from an unknown system at the very edge of explored space. Admiral Cole stood on the bridge of the HSS Vengeance, a massive battleship of the Terran Defense Fleet. He listened as the distress call echoed through the speakers, the static crackling between broken words. But one word came through clearly over and over again. Humanity. His jaw tightened. Humanity had not fought a full-scale war in decades. The galaxy had come to see them as peaceful, diplomatic, more focused on trade and exploration than battle. Many alien empires believed that humans had grown soft, that the old war fleets were nothing but relics of a violent past. But those who truly understood human nature knew better. The signal continued, a voice barely holding on to life. They are coming. We can't hold them back. If anyone hears this, please send help. Silence followed. The signal cut off. The bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances. This could be a trap, a lure designed to draw them into an ambush. The universe was cruel, and enemies lurked in the darkness, waiting for a moment of weakness. But Admiral Cole did not hesitate. "Trace the signal," he ordered. "I want coordinates now." A few tense moments passed. The crew worked quickly, running calculations, adjusting scanners. Then, an officer turned with a grim expression. "We have a location, sir. It's coming from the Epsilon Eridani system, a small colony world, unregistered on official charts." Cole's mind raced. If it was a human colony, why was it not listed? Was this a rogue settlement? Or worse, an abandoned world left to its fate? He turned to his second-in-command, Captain Rayner. "Get me everything we have on Epsilon Eridani. I want to know who's down there." The screen lit up with old records, most of them classified. It had been a frontier colony, established decades ago, but contact had been lost. Officially, it was considered missing, wiped from the records. But someone was still alive down there, and they were begging for help. A dark thought crossed Cole's mind. If this colony had been forgotten by the galaxy, then there would be no political consequences for what happened next. He exhaled slowly. "We cannot ignore this." Captain Rayner nodded. "If we go, sir, we go in force." Cole's gaze hardened. "Then we bring the Armada." The bridge fell into stunned silence. The Deathworlder Armada. It had been years since those ships last launched. Once, they were the galaxy's nightmare, massive warships designed for absolute domination. They were not built for diplomacy. They were built for annihilation. And if they were to awaken, there would be no turning back. Cole turned to his communications officer. "Send the signal to the fleet. Full mobilization. We move at dawn." Across the galaxy, ancient shipyards flickered to life. Warships, thought to be relics of a forgotten era, rumbled as their engines powered up. Soldiers, veterans of battles long past, sharpened their weapons and donned their armor. The Deathworlder Armada was stirring once more. Whoever had sent that distress call, they would not be alone for much longer. And the enemies who thought humanity was weak, they were about to learn the truth the hard way. The hunt had begun. The Deathworlder Armada moved through the void like a storm of vengeance, its massive warships cutting through the darkness of space, engines burning with silent fury. Each vessel was a monument to humanity's brutal past, a past the galaxy had foolishly believed was buried. HS's Vengeance led the fleet, its hull blackened from battles long forgotten, its weapons systems humming with restrained violence. Admiral Cole stood at the bridge, watching the star charts update as they neared their destination. The Epsilon Eridani system was only a few hours away now, and the tension inside the command deck was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every officer, every soldier, knew the weight of what they were about to do. If this was truly a distress call from a lost human colony, then they were duty-bound to respond with overwhelming force. But if it was a trap, if some alien power had lured them here, believing humanity had grown weak, then it would be the last mistake they ever made. The Armada was not here for negotiation. They were here to end the threat. The fleet exited warp space, appearing at the edge of the system in perfect formation. Cole's eyes narrowed as the scanners swept the area. The planet was there. A dull blue-green orb hanging in the abyss, its surface scarred with signs of destruction. Smoke plumes rose from cities barely visible from orbit. A battle had already happened here, or maybe it was still happening. "Scan for life signs," Cole ordered. The response came back almost immediately. There were still humans down there, but their numbers were dropping fast. The enemy was on the ground, exterminating them. And worse, they were not alone. Multiple alien warships were detected in orbit, maintaining a blockade, their sleek, insect-like hulls forming a web of death around the planet. Exhilarating warships. Cole's fists clenched. The exhilarating were a warlike race that viewed all others as prey. They had attacked humans before, raiding small settlements, testing human defenses, but they had never been foolish enough to start a full-scale war. Until now. "Open a channel," Cole said, his voice cold as steel. The comms officer hesitated, then nodded as the connection was established. Exhilarating commander appeared on screen, his mandibles clicking, his 4 black eyes filled with amusement. "Ah, the humans have arrived," the alien sneered. "You should not have come. This world belongs to us now." Cole didn't flinch. "That colony was never yours. You slaughtered civilians. You sent a distress signal directly to us. You wanted our attention. You have it." The exhilarating hissed, his chitinous exoskeleton shifting with irritation. "This system is under our control. Leave now, or be destroyed." The bridge crew remained silent, waiting for Cole's response. He exhaled slowly, then spoke in a tone colder than space itself. "No, you leave, or we burn you out of the sky." The exhilarating laughed, a harsh, clicking sound. "You think your outdated warships can challenge us? Your species hides behind trade and diplomacy. You are soft. You are prey." Cole leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Then come and see what happens when prey fights back." He cut the transmission. "All ships, attack." The Deathworlder Armada moved as one. The battle began with a fury that shook the heavens. Human warships launched into action, their cannons roaring as energy bolts and railgun slugs tore through the exhilarating fleet. The enemy had underestimated them. They had thought humanity's days of war were over. They were wrong. The HSS Vengeance surged forward, its main guns unleashing devastation, tearing through an enemy cruiser in a single volley. Boarding pods fired from the human ships, slamming into exhilarating hulls, and soon Terran Marines were storming their decks, weapons blazing. The humans fought like demons, relentless, unstoppable. On the planet below, the surviving colonists watched as the sky burned with the wreckage of exhilarating ships. Reinforcements had arrived, and humanity had come with fire and fury. The exhilarating fleet was in chaos. Their sleek warships, once so confident in their blockade, now drifted through space in ruins. Some burned, torn apart by direct hits from human railguns. Others had been disabled, their systems fried by precise EMP strikes. And then there were the ones being boarded, where human Marines were turning every corridor into a meat grinder. The exhilarating had called humans prey, but now they were the ones hunted. Aboard the HSS Vengeance, Admiral Cole watched the battlefield unfold from the command deck, his sharp eyes tracking every movement. The Deathworlder Armada was winning, but the fight was far from over. More exhilarating warships were arriving, reinforcements pouring in from deep space. "Admiral, incoming enemy fleet. 2 dreadnoughts, 5 cruisers, multiple support ships," a tactical officer reported. Cole didn't flinch. "Let them come. The exhilarating had finally realized their mistake. They had assumed humanity was weak. That was their first error. Their second, thinking that they could win a war of attrition against Deathworlders. Cole turned to his weapons officer. "Load Hellfire missiles. I want those dreadnoughts burning before they get into formation." The officer nodded. Moments later, the sky erupted. From multiple human warships, a wave of Hellfire-class missiles launched, streaking through the void with terrifying speed. The exhilarating dreadnoughts tried to deploy countermeasures, deploying interceptor drones, scrambling ECM defenses, but it was too late. The missiles detonated in a chain reaction of nuclear fire, engulfing the first dreadnought in an inferno. The second was crippled instantly, its engines ripped apart, leaving it to drift helplessly. 1 minute ago, the exhilarating had arrived as reinforcements. Now, they were nothing but wreckage. But the fight wasn't just in space. On the surface of the colony world, human ground forces had begun their counterattack. Before the fleet arrived, the exhilarating had spent weeks terrorizing the settlers, hunting them, enslaving them, treating them as nothing more than inferior creatures. Now those same settlers stood shoulder to shoulder with Terran Marines, reclaiming their world one bullet at a time. Sergeant Logan Graves moved through the ruins of what had once been a thriving human city. His rifle was raised, his HUD marking enemy positions as he advanced. Around him, fire teams of heavily armed soldiers moved with deadly precision, sweeping through the rubble, flushing out exhilarating warriors from their hiding spots. "Clear that sector. Move, move." Logan barked into his comms. His men pushed forward, firing bursts of hypervelocity rounds, tearing through exhilarating armor like paper. The enemy fought back desperately, realizing that their easy conquest had turned into a nightmare. But the exhilarating were used to fighting weak species, enemies who broke the moment the battle turned against them. Humans weren't like that. The harder the fight, the more humans dug in. And when pushed to the brink, they pushed back twice as hard. A exhilarating war leader roared from behind cover, wielding a plasma blade, his chitinous armor glowing from heat vents. He lunged at Logan, expecting the human to panic, to fall back, to run. He didn't. Logan sidestepped, raised his knife, and in one brutal motion, drove it straight into the exhilarating's throat. Black ichor sprayed from the wound, and the alien collapsed, twitching. Logan didn't even spare him a glance. He kept moving. The ground battle was a massacre. Exhilarating forces collapsed, their morale shattered. Some tried to retreat to their landing ships, but the humans were faster, cutting them down before they could escape. Others surrendered, throwing down their weapons, begging for mercy. But humanity remembered what the exhilarating had done to the settlers. The executions, the tortures, the burning cities. The only mercy given was quick deaths. Above, in orbit, the Deathworlder Armada was finishing its work. The last exhilarating ships broke ranks, turning and fleeing into deep space, leaving their remaining forces to die. They had come believing they could conquer a human world. Instead, they had awakened a monster. Admiral Cole watched as the final enemy ships disappeared from his radar. He exhaled, slow and steady. The battle was won. But war? War was just beginning. The exhilarating had made their move, and now humanity would respond. Not with diplomacy, not with negotiations, but with fire and vengeance. The war should have ended. The exhilarating had been crushed in space, their fleets torn apart, their ground forces slaughtered. They should have learned their lesson. But arrogance was a powerful poison, and the exhilarating were drowning in it. Instead of retreating, instead of acknowledging their mistake, they doubled down. They declared total war on humanity. The message arrived in the form of a planetary bombardment. A human outpost on the edge of Terran space, Hadrian's Reach, was wiped out in an instant. The attack came without warning. Exhilarating warships jumped in-system and rained down kinetic strikes, turning entire cities into craters. Millions of civilians, men, women, children, were incinerated in the first wave. Those who survived the bombardment faced something worse. Exhilarating hunters. The invaders landed in force, their ground troops spreading through the wreckage like a plague. The survivors were rounded up, shackled, and herded onto transports. The exhilarating didn't just want to win. They wanted to enslave humanity. Back on Earth, the Terran High Command watched in horrified silence as the reports came in. The screams, the desperate calls for help that had never been answered in time. The exhilarating had made their intentions clear. They didn't just want to conquer. They wanted to eradicate human defiance. For a brief moment, the leaders of humanity sat in silence. Then, Admiral Cole stood up from his chair and issued the order that would change the course of history. Deploy the Deathworlder Armada. Wipe them out. The exhilarating did not know true fear. They had fought wars before. They had conquered weaker species, crushed planetary defenses, imposed their will upon entire civilizations. But they had never faced an enemy like humanity. When the Terran Armada arrived, it did not come in small fleets. It did not arrive in waves. It arrived as a storm of steel and fire, blotting out the stars. Hundreds of warships, each bristling with weapons designed for annihilation, surged into the system. The flagship, HS Retribution, led the charge. It was a behemoth, an apocalypse-class battleship, covered in layered armor thicker than some space stations. It did not maneuver. It did not evade. It simply moved forward, absorbing enemy fire like it was nothing, its guns spitting death in every direction. The exhilarating fleet tried to form a defensive line, but they were too slow. The Deathworlder Armada punched through like a spear through flesh. Railguns shredded hulls. Plasma lances melted decks. EMP bursts fried their systems. Exhilarating captains screamed into their comms, demanding reinforcements, but there were none left to call. Within minutes, the once proud exhilarating defense fleet was shattered. Hundreds of ships burned, their wreckage drifting aimlessly through the void. Some exhilarating warships tried to run, but human torpedoes hunted them down, ripping them apart even as they fled. And then the ground invasion began. Hadrian's Reach had been a human colony. Now it was a graveyard. The exhilarating had turned the surviving population into prisoners, forcing them into camps, treating them like nothing more than animals. The alien overlords walked among them, arrogant and unchallenged, believing that humanity was broken. They were wrong. When the first orbital drop pods landed, the exhilarating were caught completely off guard. They had expected a slow, careful assault. What they got was an unstoppable human war machine. The first wave of Terran shock troops hit the ground like thunder. Clad in reinforced power armor, wielding hypervelocity rifles, the Deathworlder Marines stormed the camps, slaughtering the exhilarating guards in seconds. The aliens barely had time to raise their weapons before they were cut down, their bodies torn apart by human firepower. Sergeant Logan Graves led his fire team through the ruined streets, his rifle raised. Around him, the battle raged. Human dropships roared overhead, deploying mechs the size of buildings, their cannons leveling entire exhilarating fortifications in a single shot. An exhilarating captain tried to rally his forces, screaming at his troops to stand their ground. But fear had already set in. The sight of unstoppable human soldiers, their armor stained with exhilarating blood, their weapons cutting through even the strongest defenses, was too much. The exhilarating broke. Some tried to run, but snipers ended them before they could take more than a few steps. Others fell to their knees, throwing down their weapons, begging for mercy. There was none. Humanity did not forget. Humanity did not forgive. The exhilarating had shown none to the civilians they slaughtered, to the children they burned alive, to the settlers they enslaved. So humanity showed them the same. Within hours, the exhilarating occupation was over. The few survivors were rounded up, marched into holding areas, and left to rot. There would be no negotiations, no peace treaties. The Deathworlder Armada was just getting started. Hadrian's Reach was just the first target. Now, humanity was taking the war to the exhilarating homeworlds. The Auxiliary High Command had been watching the battle unfold in real time. Their war councils gathered in their towering citadel on Xelvok Prime, a heart of their empire. When Hadrian's reach fell, they refused to believe it at first. When their fleets were obliterated, they called it a temporary setback. When their forces on the ground were exterminated, they tried to rationalize it. But now, there was no denying the truth. Humanity was coming for them. The greatest fleet the Xilari had ever assembled was gone. Their most feared warriors lay dead on a burning colony. The Deathworlder Armada had torn through their defenses like they were nothing. And now, the Terrans were not stopping. Admiral Vacarus, Supreme Commander of the Xilari fleet, stared at the holographic projection of the approaching human warships. They were heading straight for Xilari space, their engines burning with relentless fury. The Deathworlder Armada was moving faster than any fleet the Xilari had ever encountered. There was no hesitation, no delay, just a merciless advance. Vacarus clenched his mandibles. The Xilari had ruled the stars for centuries, built their empire through war and conquest. They had crushed countless civilizations, enslaved entire species. They had never lost a war. Until now. The Xilari Home Defense Fleet, the last true military force the Empire had left, was mobilizing. It was massive, a force of thousands of warships, armed with planetary defense platforms, orbital cannons, and automated drone swarms. Every last weapon the Xilari had left was being prepared for humanity's arrival. "This is our final stand," Vacarus growled, turning to his war council. "The humans will break against our defenses, or we will cease to exist." But humanity did not break. When the Deathworlder Armada arrived, it did not come as an orderly battle formation. It came as a hurricane. Xilari warships fired first, unleashing waves of plasma torpedoes and particle lances. The void lit up as the weapons screamed toward the incoming fleet. And then, with inhuman precision, the Terrans maneuvered. What should have been a direct hit turned into a slaughter, but not for humanity. The first wave of Terran warships twisted and dodged through the chaos, their advanced AI systems predicting and countering every Xilari tactic. Railgun batteries roared, sending rams traveling at near-light speed straight into the enemy ranks. Xilari ships exploded in an instant. The Deathworlder Armada didn't slow down. They punched through. Human dreadnoughts, colossal machines of war, moved forward without hesitation. Their shields absorbed everything. Their super-heavy cannons unleashed kinetic death, firing planet cracker rounds that tore Xilari warships apart in a single hit. The battle wasn't a fight, it was an execution. Xilari admirals screamed for reinforcements, for tactical retreat orders, for anything that could stop the humans. But there was no escape. The Deathworlder Armada had come to finish the war. And they did. On the surface of Xelvok Prime, chaos reigned. The once proud capital city was in panic. The Xilari had always ruled through fear, believing their might was unmatched. Now, they were facing an enemy that did not fear them. The first orbital bombardments hit without warning. Massive railgun rounds rained down from orbit, shattering entire military bases. Shock troopers landed in waves, human soldiers in advanced exo-armor, dropping into the burning ruins with brutal efficiency. The Xilari planetary defense forces, once considered unbreakable, were being cut down like vermin. And then the Deathworlder elites arrived. These were not ordinary soldiers. These were humanity's finest warriors, the ones born and raised on Deathworlds that made even the harshest Xilari colonies look like paradise. Cybernetically enhanced, battle-hardened, ruthless. They did not take prisoners. The Xilari, once so sure of their superiority, now begged for mercy. But humanity did not forget Hadrian's reach. Humanity did not forget the millions who had died screaming under Xilari bombardments. And so, there was no mercy. This was the end of the Xilari Empire, and humanity was making sure it would be remembered forever. The sky above Xelvok Prime was burning. Once a symbol of unshakable power, the capital world of the Exhilarating Empire was now a graveyard of falling warships and collapsing towers. The Deathworlder Armada had torn through the planetary defenses like they were made of paper, their railgun barrages and orbital bombardments reducing entire cities to ash and rubble. The Exhilari had once believed themselves to be the masters of war, the greatest warriors of the galaxy. But now, their empire was dying, and humanity was delivering the final blow. Admiral Vacaris, Supreme Commander of the Exhilari Home Defense Fleet, stood in the war room of the Imperial Citadel, his mandibles trembling as he watched the live battlefield feeds. He had never seen anything like this. His armies were crumbling, his warships were burning, and his people were screaming into comm channels, begging for orders, begging for a miracle. But there were no miracles left, only death. The last of the Exhilari war fleets had been annihilated in high orbit. Human dreadnoughts loomed in the sky like gods of war, their cannons still smoking from the destruction they had wrought. Thousands of drop pods rained down, bringing human shock troopers straight into the heart of Exhilari territory. Every bunker, every fortress, every desperate stronghold was being overrun. And then, a new transmission echoed across all Exhilari channels. A single message, simple and final. Surrender or be erased. The voice was calm, human, and without emotion. It was not a demand. It was a statement of fact. Vacaris turned to his war council. Half of them were gone. Some had fled. Others had taken the coward's way out, choosing death over capture. The few that remained stared at him, waiting for him to speak, to give them some final command, to tell them what to do. But what could he say? What could he possibly do against this? The Deathworlders had come, and they had no mercy left to give. In the ruins of HFY Prime, the fighting continued, but it was no longer a battle. It was a massacre. The Exhilari soldiers fought like cornered animals, desperate and wild, but it didn't matter. The humans were stronger, faster, and more ruthless. They moved in coordinated strikes, using advanced exosuits and enhanced targeting systems to eliminate entire enemy battalions before they could even react. And then came the Deathworlder elites. The Exhilari had heard of them before, but they had never truly understood what they were. These were the soldiers born on the most hostile planets humanity had to offer, warriors who had survived environments that would have killed any Exhilari in seconds. Now, they were here, walking through the rubble of burning Exhilari cities, their armor blood-stained, their weapons still smoking. One squad entered what remained of a Exhilari command bunker, finding a group of wounded officers trying to send out a last desperate distress signal. The humans didn't hesitate. The officers were dead before they even realized they had been found. Another unit moved through the Imperial Palace district, encountering the last remnants of the Exhilari Royal Guard. These were the best warriors the Empire had left, the elite defenders of their emperor. They lasted 2 minutes. The human railguns shredded their armor, their blades cut through their bodies, and when it was over, not a single guard was left standing. The streets of the capital ran red with Exhilari blood. Back in the war room, Admiral Vacaris finally spoke, his voice hollow. "We must send the surrender." His mandibles barely moved, his eyes empty. A Exhilari officer, trembling, whispered, "The Emperor will not allow it." Vacaris let out a bitter, broken laugh. "The Emperor is dead." Silence fell over the room. The Exhilari Empire, once so mighty, so feared, so unbreakable, was over. The only question left was whether the humans would allow them to exist at all. As the Deathworlder Armada tightened its grip, as the last of the Exhilari defenses collapsed, one thing was certain. Humanity had come to end a war, and they had done so without mercy. The once glorious Exhilari Empire, now reduced to ashes and ruins, lay under the relentless advance of the human forces. The streets of HFY Prime had fallen silent, save for the sounds of crumbling buildings and the echoes of those who had resisted to the very end. In the heart of the devastated capital, The last remnants of the auxiliary leadership gathered, broken and defeated, inside the Imperial Citadel. The towering structure that had once symbolized their unshakable power now felt hollow and cold. Admiral Vacaris sat in the dimly lit war room, his body battered from the constant onslaught. His once proud uniform was torn, and his eyes were sunken from the countless sleepless nights. The final hours of his people had come, and his choices had dwindled to nothing. The last human ultimatum still echoed in his mind: surrender or be erased. There was nothing left to protect. His empire, his people, had been wiped out, piece by piece, like a house of cards falling in slow motion. The thought of surrendering had once felt impossible, but now, standing at the very end of the line, it felt like the only option. The decision was made, but as he began to open the communication link, a sudden interruption stopped him. A voice, human, cold, and impersonal, came through the comms. "Admiral, do you understand what is happening? What you've brought upon your people?" Vacaris' mandibles clicked in frustration. The voice of the human commander, the one responsible for all the destruction, had become an ever-present specter in his mind. How could he face them now? The humans weren't just warriors. They were something else. They were a force of nature, relentless, unstoppable, and now they were at his doorstep. "We will surrender," he said, his voice heavy with defeat, "but we beg you, show mercy." The transmission remained silent for a few long moments, as if the human commander was considering the words. The silence felt like an eternity. Finally, the voice responded. No compassion, no hesitation, just a simple, undeniable truth. "You are already being erased." Vacaris froze, his claws clenched into fists. He had known this moment would come, but hearing it spoken out loud felt like the weight of the galaxy itself. Humanity was done with him, with his people. They had already given their verdict. In a final, desperate act, the remaining auxiliary officers launched the last defensive measure they had, an old, barely functioning self-destruct sequence meant to take down what was left of their homeworld. It was an act of futile defiance, an attempt to drag the humans down with them. But it was no use. The human fleet had anticipated this move. The Deathworlder commanders had prepared for every possible contingency, knowing the auxiliary would fight to the very last. And so, as the final countdown began, the humans simply jammed the signal, rendering the auxiliary's last act of defiance useless. The countdown halted, and the planet was spared from total destruction. For now. But it was clear that nothing could stop the inevitable. Zilvok Prime would soon fall silent, and the human fleet would claim the remains of the once proud empire as their prize. Admiral Vacaris, still standing at the center of the war room, slumped into his chair, defeated. The universe, once vast and unknowable, had become something entirely different in the wake of humanity's relentless march. They were no longer just a part of the galaxy. They had become its rulers. The auxiliary had thought they were the most powerful, but humanity had proven them wrong in the most brutal and decisive way possible. Outside, the skies grew darker as the last of the auxiliary cities crumbled. The Deathworlder Armada circled the planet, their ships hanging ominously in the atmosphere like a gathering storm. The remaining auxiliary civilians, huddled in their shelters, could only listen in fear as the human forces prepared for their final strike. The galaxy had learned a lesson it would never forget. Humanity had shown them what true war meant. The transmission from the human fleet commander continued. "We warned you, Silari. You thought you understood war. But now, you know the truth." And in the final moments of Zilvok Prime's existence, Admiral Vacaris understood the depth of his mistake. He had underestimated humanity. And now, there was no turning back. The skies burned bright once again as the Deathworlder fleet's weapons fired, obliterating everything in their path, leaving nothing behind but the dark silence of space. Humanity had won. And with it, they had proven that in the galaxy's brutal and unforgiving reality, there was only one rule: survive or perish.